This is a brief introduction to dynamic status plots. We're going to use the U.S. West Coast example as it comes up on the website as the first option, but you can do this visualization for any of the regions. First, let's understand the basic structure of the plot. The x-axis down here is a measure of the stock size, the stock biomass in any year divided by the biomass that would produce maximum sustained yield. The y-axis is a measure of fishing pressure, the current exploitation rate divided by the exploitation rate that would produce maximum sustainable yield. If we wanted to maximize long-term yield, we'd want to see the points cluster around 1, 1, roughly right here. On this graph, each point is an individual stock for the year shown at the bottom. I'm going to move the time slider forward to 1990 when we have most of the U.S. West Coast stocks represented. That gets us to 1990. The size of the circle is proportional to the potential maximum sustainable yield, so the big circles are generally larger stocks. The color indicates the taxonomic group, so this Pacific hake is a gadded. This albacore tuna is a tuna and marlin. So in 1990, we see the largest stock was Pacific hake, and at the time the biomass was quite high, roughly twice the level that would produce maximum sustainable yield, and fishing pressure was slightly below the level that would produce maximum sustained yield. At the same time, the second largest circle is Pacific albacore tuna, which was slightly below the level that would produce maximum sustained yield. And its fishing pressure was reasonably low, about half of that which would produce maximum sustained yield. In the upper left-hand part of the graph, we see three stocks that are being fished very hard, at least 3 times harder than would produce maximum sustained yield. They are cowcod in Southern California, canary rockfish, and lingcod in Southern California. As I say, they're pinned to the axis, so this is a value of 3. There are at least 3 or possibly higher. Now this kind of graph is now commonly called a Kobe plot, after the Japanese city of Kobe, where a meeting was being held when these kinds of graphs were first commonly presented. In general, the upper left is a bad place to be. You're fishing too hard and stocks are below target levels. The lower right, stocks are abundant and not being fished too much. Depending upon your objective, this is a good region where you have lots of fish that are lightly exploited, or another perspective is it's a region of unrealized potential food production and you're actually underexploiting. The lower left in here is the region of recovery. Stocks are at low abundance but being fished lightly. Now we can run this history of the region by sliding time back to the beginning, starting in 1950, and letting it run automatically. Now I'm going to stop it in the mid-1970s simply by clicking on the time slider. There we are, we're in 1976. And what we saw is some stocks pop onto the graph when their assessment data began. In the mid-1970s, this region was just starting to develop. Most stocks were well above the level that would produce maximum sustained yield, but quite a few were being fished hard at rates higher than would produce maximum sustained yield. And that's now what in the U.S. is called overfishing. So these stocks would now be classified as subject to overfishing. Now I'm going to slide forward to 1990, where we were before. And by this point, we've seen fishing pressure. Let's go back to 1990 exactly. We see fishing pressure is pretty high on quite a few stocks. We still have some underexploited stocks, but we've got a lot of excess fishing pressure. I'm now going to move forward through the 1990s, where a lot of interesting things happened. And I'll probably stop it and then go back. Okay, so what we see is by 2000, almost all those stocks that are being fished too hard are now not being fished too hard. The fishing mortality rates have been reduced. Just watch them come down. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Exploitation rates were being reduced, and we see a lot of stocks that were pinned to the high exploitation rates dropping down, so that by 2000, very few stocks are above 1.0 on the y-axis. But at this point, we have a lot of stocks that are already fished down well below BMSY. We'll go forward to 2005, where we see that almost all stocks are being very lightly fished, except Pacific Hake, which was being fished hard at the time, Pacific Petroleum Sol, and those are the only two stocks that in 2005 were well above 1.0. Finally, let me show you one tool to use to visualize these data. I'm going to go over to this little box, and I'm going to go down to Canary Rockfish. I'm going to put a check on Canary Rockfish, and then I'm going to run it forward over time. And what you see is it plots the point of Canary Rockfish every year and then leaves a tail, so we can follow the history where we started out at high abundance and reasonably low fishing pressure, went up to very high fishing pressure, pinned to the top axis. Abundance declined under that fishing pressure, and then fishing pressure was reduced dramatically, so it's hardly caught at all. And then once fishing pressure was down below 1, the stock started to rebuild. There's quite a few more features of these dynamic status plots, but those are going to have to be a subject for a later video, and I'm going to stop right now.